Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's guest speaker has been an efficiency expert for government and has led several state-level agencies for Massachusetts, including Director of Human Resources. He's the author of the book, which you see on the screen here, If We Can Put a Man on the Moon, Getting Big Things Done in Government. He's a frequent contributor to the blog Better, Faster, Cheaper, a blog devoted to improving government on governing.com. He's also a frequent contributor to the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and elsewhere. Will you please welcome Mr. John O'Leary.
Thank you so very much, Dale. It's great to be here tonight. I want to thank Dale and Northwood University for the chance to address you all tonight. I recognize that I'm the only thing standing between you and the end of a long day of enlightenment, and I can't do all tonight. So I'll try to thank my Mark's on point and somewhat entertaining. Oh, there we go. Oh, I feel like Tony Robbins now. Yeah, let's go. I don't like. I'm going to have you all walk over burning coals out in the hallway in just a moment. If we can put a man on the moon, how many times have you heard that expression, right? If we can put a man on the moon, why can't we cure cancer? If we can put a man on the moon, why can't we fix our urban schools or get our economy going? Or one my wife has said on occasion, if we can put a man on the moon, why can't we put all of them there? Or one from my favorite news source, The Onion, if we can put, The Onion, yeah, we have an Onion fan. If we can put a man on the moon, but we can't make killer robot police? It's a cliche now, right? If we can put a man on the moon. But you know, it didn't start out as a cliche. In 1961, the moon was really a metaphor for a much larger question that was facing our nation, in fact, facing the world. In 1961, there were two competing ideologies at play on our planet. One was freedom and democracy represented by the United States, and one was socialism and authoritarianism represented by the Soviet Union. And the race to the moon became a metaphor for which system of government would prevail in the ideological race that was facing the globe. And it was no clear thing at the time that it would be democracy that would win. In 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected president and took office in 1961. So in January of 1961, he gives that famous inauguration speech, and just 3 months later, in April, a very dramatic event occurred that really put him on the heels in the space race. And does anybody know what that was? In 1961, April 1961. No, they didn't put a man on the moon. The Soviets did it. No, Sputnik was 1957. Yuri Gagarin became the first man to orbit the planet. The Soviet Union, you see, was way ahead of us in the space race. In 1957, they had launched the first satellite by the name of Sputnik, which started a bunch of concern here. They had also put the first female in space. Anybody know who the first female in space was? Her picture is up here. Laika. Who said that? All right, Laika the dog. And this is a there's Laika. And there's a statue of Laika the dog in Moscow, the first female in space. And then in April of 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man to orbit the Earth, the first person in space. And then just a week later, in April, another dramatic event came that made communism seem like a much more effective and efficient system of government than democracy. Can anybody tell me what this event was? What was it? Bay of Pigs. I'm hearing it's Bay of Pigs. So the Bay of Pigs was American-backed troops trying to land on the shores and beaches of Cuba were beaten by the communist Fidel Castro. So here's this young president, John Kennedy, in April of 1961. He's in office 3 months, and the Soviets put a man into space. A week later, he's humiliated on the Bay of Pigs. His presidency is crashing and burning before it even gets started. So 1 month after this event, he has a joint session of Congress, and he makes a very famous and notable address. I believe that this nation should commit itself to the goal before the decade is out, of putting a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No other space project will be so impressive to mankind. We do not choose to go to the moon and do the other things because they are easy, but because they are hard. Thank you. Thank you. I spent some time at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and they require everyone to actually be able to do that. The remarkable thing was that though we were behind in the space race, way behind, we pulled together as a nation. And a public government achievement, in 1969, Neil Armstrong planted the American flag on the moon. It is still one of the most incredible achievements of all time. Technological achievement, engineering feat, government feat. Think about it. Since the last time we walked in the moon, in the mid-70s, no one else has managed to do it. That's almost 40 years later. You could imagine Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1929. Imagine 40 years later, nobody's ever flown across the Atlantic. No, it's like, it is still an incredible achievement when you look back on it. Putting a man on the moon was remarkable. But this capped off a series of remarkable achievements for the United States in the prior 25 years. When Neil Armstrong is planting the American flag on the moon in 1969, it is incredibly easy to be wildly proud of America and its government. Because in the prior 25 years, think about what we had done. We had executed on the Marshall Plan and split the atom. We had won World War II and defeated Nazism. We had defeated Japan. We had established a peaceful democracy in Japan. We had executed the Berlin airlift and stood up to communism. We had done the national highway system. We had a thriving economy. Detroit, with its the cars and our ability to create economic prosperity, our government, our way of life, our system of doing things, it was easy to sit there and go, yes, American government is better than socialism and communism. Democracy can do incredibly important things. We are a great nation with a great government. Since then, and if you think of, and you contrast that feeling of pride that we had when we were giving a ticker tape parade for the astronauts, could you imagine giving a ticker tape parade now for public workers of some kind? All the things that have gone wrong with government and that feeling that we have in our nation that, we've gone from this to, cash for clunkers. We've had Iraq and Katrina, and this is the Boston Big Dig where the tunnel collapses, and we have the economy in a meltdown, and we can't seem to achieve anything through government. Nothing we try seems to be working. So what we did is we were trying to figure out why is it that things are going this way. And we started out, my co-author and I on this book, we surveyed senior officials in government, the senior executive service, and we asked them, you've been in government for a long time, do you think we're as effective as we are 30 or 50 years ago? And 60% of them told us, no, we're not as good. So this isn't just the opinion of sort of the uninformed folks on the street. This is the senior officials in government. These, by the way, are the hundreds of buses that were submerged in New Orleans. They were never used to evacuate the people out of New Orleans prior to the disaster. That's what these buses were for. They're about 1.5 miles from the Superdome, and they never got people on them to get them out of town prior to the hurricane. And they're here submerged following Katrina. So why is it that some things succeed and some things fail? And that's really what we tried to look at the book and really try to come to understand so that we can help guide better public policy and public administration. So we wrote the book, If We Can Put a Man on the Moon, and my co-author is a consultant, and I'm an engineer, and so we really sort of came at it from a couple of different perspectives. But what we came up with is that the journey to success in government is a journey that goes through 5 stages. You have to start with a good idea. You have to have an effective legislative design. And here's a step that most public sector private sectors don't have, is you have to get it through what we call the Stargate, which is a moment of political achievement. It's when a bill becomes a law, for example, or when budget money is attributed to a task. And that's a very special moment, as we'll see in the journey. Once you commit to doing something, you still have to implement it or execute on it, and then finally get the results, hopefully the results that you set out to find. What we found in the book was that in order to be successful, you had to have a success at every phase of the journey. But in order to fail, all you had to do was fail at any part of the journey. It's like the weakest link in the chain. If you have a bad idea, it doesn't matter how good you execute it. If you have a great design, if it doesn't get enacted into law, it doesn't happen. So in order to get success and successful results, so we looked at sort of what are the problems, what are the challenges, what are the ways that you can experience failure at each of these different phases. So, let me see. Oh, there we go. Whoops. Oh. I got to go backwards here. Let's see. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about the war on inflation. So in 1971, the nation was starting to experience some inflation. It was really starting to be a concern in the 50s and 60s. Inflation had been relatively quiet. And then in 1970, it started to heat up. And the U.S. Congress did a very interesting thing in 1970. They passed a law that basically gave President Richard Nixon extraordinary and quite possibly unconstitutional powers over the economy, the powers to set wages and prices throughout our economy. Now, they didn't direct the president how to use these powers. They just sort of said, they said, here, President, you can do anything you need to solve this problem. And President Nixon, during World War II, had actually been in the Office of Wage and Price Controls during World War II. And he had first-hand experience that wage and price controls really don't work very well. But nonetheless, inflation was continuing, and after about 10 months, he made the extraordinary leap of declaring a 90-day freeze on wages and prices. Now, it's hard to imagine today that in America, with a free economy and a market system of government, that the president was freezing wages, interest rates, how much a dentist could charge for a cavity, how much you could pay an employee, all these things that happen in the private market. So in order to execute on this, he actually hired and brought on board to the Cost of Living Council 2 very bright young Republicans. Anybody know who these guys are? Oh, this table's getting all the answers. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that this table, I think I know why this table's getting some things. Yeah, you were there when it happened. These folks weren't. That's Dick Cheney. That's Dick Cheney, and that is Donald Rumsfeld. So, these guys started promulgating regulations. But if you've been paying attention to the economics courses and the economics topics that you've heard, you've probably heard people tell you that wage and price controls don't work. Government can't just pass a law and say that a lovely salmon dinner like the one we just had is going to cost $9.95. Well, they can pass the law, but it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And that's what happened with the Cost of Living Council. It went on for about 18 months, and inflation just went crazy. What happened was this Cost of Living Council couldn't keep up with the economy. They couldn't issue regulations fast enough. They also couldn't enforce all these regulations. If you want to have a $9.95 salmon dinner, oh, that's fine. You'll get that, but then you're going to pay, $22 for the plate service or something. People are clever enough to get around the rules of anything, and they went right past this wage and price controls. So that wasn't a very good idea. Richard Nixon, he ran into some problems. He left the presidency. And a guy by the name of Gerald Ford came into office. Now, Gerald Ford came in. Watergate was a very wrenching experience for the American people, for American culture, American government. Richard Nixon had left the office, and Gerald Ford was going to address the American people and Congress for the first time in August after, or a couple months after Nixon left. And he wanted to address the nation's #1 problem, which was inflation. So after a great deal of thought, he and his top economic advisors decided that the way that they would tackle the inflation problem. Does anybody beside this table know how President Ford actually went after the inflation problem? Don't let these guys think they know everything. This is wrong. I know, but you can read books. There's a book over here you should think about looking up. Okay, so you guys just tell him, what did he do? He had a win button. He had a win button, which stood for whip inflation now. You see, President Ford believed, mistakenly, that inflation was largely a psychological phenomenon, that if people believed prices were going up, they would charge more for prices and demand more on wages. President Ford was wrong. He had a bad idea. Inflation is entirely and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. In fact, if you increase or inflate the supply of money, you will actually, prices will rise. Inflation, the real inflation is the inflation in the price of money, not in the price, in the supply of money, not in prices. That is an effect, a symptom of the inflation of the money supply. The ironic thing about this speech before Congress is, as President Ford is coming up with all these ideas like everybody should wear this whip inflation now button and people should charge 5% less for food and they should drive 5% fewer miles and all these crazy stuff, he also says, and oh, I've got some really good news. The Federal Reserve Chairman has assured me that he's going to keep interest rates really low and keep pumping money into the economy. And the Congress gave him a standing ovation for that line because terrific. The one thing, he didn't understand that he was actually going to make inflation worse. And lo and behold, inflation was reaching 14, 15% within a year or two, and Gerald Ford did not win re-election. Bad ideas cannot be implemented successfully. And one of the traps that we talk about in the book, those barriers to success, or the traps along the journey to success, is what we call the overconfidence trap. Overestimating government's ability to tackle a problem through legislation. In the same way that I imagine the person who loaded up this truck was maybe a little overconfident in thinking about how much they could carry down the road. It is a recurring theme in our studies. So the next thing is design, and I'm going to go through this section really quickly, but this one's a little bit more modern, so maybe some of you have heard about it, though you were still probably too young to care. In 1999, California was facing high energy prices for electricity. And so what they wanted to do was to introduce a market system for energy purchases. It sounded like a good idea, but it turns out that energy and electricity is a very complicated market, and the law that they put in had the goal of lowering electricity costs, but what it really did was it led to rolling blackouts. It led to incredible spikes in energy prices. And in fact, there was a group of folks at a company who understood the law better than the legislators who had passed it and took great advantage of the loopholes in the new electricity system to make huge profits in a short period of time. Does anybody know what that company was? Enron, all right. See, we're getting closer to today. We're doing all right. Enron, it cost about $40 billion to California consumers. Enron became a huge sensation in terms of wealth. They would literally, because of the way electricity works, it actually travels at the speed of light, they could actually sell electricity or buy electricity out of Southern California for like 10 cents and resell it through Northern California, the same electricity, for 10 to 15 times as much, $1.50 to $2 a kilowatt hour or whatever. And it was all because the legislation was so complicated. So what was wrong with the legislative design that the legislature had passed? They just didn't understand the way the markets worked well enough to fix them, or to alter them in a way that there would be checks and balances. But the scary thing about the California energy crisis that cost $40 billion and that California is still digging out of is the fact that it was passed unanimously by the California legislature. Not a single vote. And this is a very heavy split between Democrats and Republicans. It's very balanced. Nobody who passed this bill understood how it was going to work, because within 18 months it started to unravel. Within about 3 years, Governor Gray Davis was recalled out of office, and we got Arnold Schwarzenegger. I could do an Arnold imitation too, but I don't think you guys are up for it. No, I don't think so, no. No, it's too cheap. That's cheap. It's cheap. Kennedy's okay. Arnold's, that's not all right. So I'll be back. No, I'm not going to do it. So the design phase. The next phase is the Stargate, which is where you actually have to get a piece of legislation passed for it to become reality, right? You can have the best idea in the world. You can craft a really wonderful piece of legislation. But if it doesn't get voted on by a majority of people and passed into law, it doesn't happen. It doesn't produce the results you're looking for. The challenge here is that, one is that a lot of times people will change the design to fit it through the Stargate, and you will get something that doesn't look anything like its original idea. The other problem is that politicians love to celebrate after something gets through Stargate. Why is that? Because at the idea phase and at the design phase, project is in the political world. It's an idea, or it's a bill, or it's an amendment. It's being talked about and argued by politicians. The Freedom Act, the DREAM Act, the Economic Stabilization Act, the Stimulus Bill, it's all in the political world until the moment it passes, and then it becomes into the bureaucratic world. So once a bill passes, that is the moment that politicians celebrate their success because their job is done. And so what happens is you have huge celebrations at bill signings, but you haven't really achieved the results. So what's an example of this? There's the Stargate from the sci-fi show. How many people have seen the sci-fi show Stargate? Okay, there's a few geeks in the room. I like that. That's good. It's a good show. It was you go through the Stargate and you instantly travel to a different universe, which is kind of what happens when a bill becomes a law. It goes from the political universe to the bureaucratic universe. So what happens when a bill becomes a law? People celebrate. Here's Gerald Ford signing the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1974. He has a small cheering section with him. But his goal was energy independence. And 6 years later, we were importing 400,000 barrels per day higher than when he signed the legislation. Well, okay, that one didn't work. But when Jimmy Carter signed the National Energy Act in 1978, the goal was to get 20% of our energy from the sun by the end of the century, by the year 2000. By the year 2000, the sun was providing us 0.007% of our energy. He missed by this much, but he still signed a really good bill. This is George W. Bush signing the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and you can see he's got a bigger cheering section. I think it's an important indication of the success of our political system that when you sign a bill, you get more and more people around you now. This piece of legislation worked so poorly that it was just 2 years later that he signed the Energy Independence Act in 2007. And I don't know if you've noticed, we haven't solved our energy issues yet, right? In part because government may be biting off more than it can chew by saying that you can fix these energy problems simply by passing a law. All right. Well, this is a good journey, right? So far we're doing all right. We've got idea, design. We get the part where we get things through the Stargate and we celebrate. All right. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about the laws that get passed and the reality of how they actually work in practice. Because once something goes through the Stargate, now they're not only in the bureaucratic realm where they get executed on by the bureaucracy, they're also in the public realm where they have to act on real people. And depending on how people respond to the law that gets passed, you will get different results. You may even get results other than those which you intended. No Child Left Behind was a piece of legislation that was passed with 90% of Congress voting for it. Both Ted Kennedy and George W. Bush were for it. There was much celebrating when No Child Left Behind was passed in 2004. There's nobody now who believes that No Child Left Behind has had any positive impact on education performance in the U.S. We talked about energy. Biofuel, this is an interesting one. There was an obscure piece of legislation that passed in one of these energy bills that its goal was to encourage alternative energy use. And so what it basically said was, if you use a mixture of fossil fuels like oil and naturally occurring biofuel like corn, ethanol, and that kind of thing, they'll give you a subsidy of like 60 cents a gallon or whatever to encourage the use of alternative fuels. It was expected that this would be like a $16 billion program, a very small program. Except there was a group of people up in Maine who worked at paper mills. And the way paper mills work is they use a lot of electricity, but the cool thing is they actually get a lot of their own electricity from the natural byproduct of pulp making. When you're making pulp from wood, there's an extract that comes out of the wood called black liquor that can be burned to generate electricity. And since the 1930s, paper mills have been using black liquor to consume tons and tons of electricity. When this legislation passed, there was no goal to affect paper mills. But what the paper mills realized was that if they added, and I want you to think about this, if they added a certain amount of fossil fuels, oil, to their black pulp, that they would qualify for the tax credit. Okay? So rather than actually using this natural biofuel to make electricity, they're now actually adding fossil fuels, but getting hundreds of millions of dollars to do this. It was a huge scam. Another one, electric vehicles. They had another thing that you get a $5,000 rebate for electric cars. That came out of Congress. This one is just so phenomenal. People are very creative. What this shows you is that people are very creative, because the people who figured this one out were golf cart manufacturers. You wouldn't think that golf cart manufacturers are all that clever, right? But they figured out that if their cars are electric, and all they had to do to qualify for this $5,000, a golf cart goes for about $8,000, right? It's a golf cart, for crying out loud. They go for like $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. If they put a rear view mirror and seatbelts in it, it would qualify as roadworthy in Florida, and they could qualify for this $5,000 rebate. And they were making huge profits on that. People will take advantage of laws in ways that you didn't anticipate. One of my favorite stories is the incredible tragedy that struck America in 1987 when 7 million children disappeared. I know this is before your time, but I'm sure you read about this. 7 million American children disappeared. Come on, you read about this, right? 7 million American children disappeared in one day. No, April 15th, 1987. What happened? What happened? That was the day that the IRS required that you write down the Social Security number of your child dependents. And on that day, 7 million American children disappeared off of the IRS payrolls. People had been claiming children that didn't exist, or two people had been claiming the same child. What is that? What is that? You seem outraged. You seem outraged. It is sad. It's human, too, though, because human beings are scammers. I know that if they had that rule now, and this is the amazing thing, 2 years later, this is completely true, this is totally true, 2 years later, 2.5 million babysitters disappeared when the IRS required to take the child care deduction. 2.7 million babysitters disappeared. And I always imagine myself, the 7 million missing children and the 2.5 million babysitters playing in this wonderful, wonderful scammer world with pink ponies. And I mean, think about it. It's a beautiful thing. What it really shows is that people will take advantage of laws in ways that no one can anticipate. No legislator can anticipate the cleverness of the golf cart operator or the paper mills up in Maine that are going to do this. And this last one is TANF, which is the old food stamps program, but this guy named Leroy Fick. Anybody here heard of Leroy Fick? He was in the news about a year or two ago here in Michigan. Leroy Fick won the $2 million lotto show on TV that you win $2 million. Yeah, he won $2 million. And the nice thing was this guy was kind of guy was kind of down and out. He was receiving food stamps. He was on SSI, the Supplemental Social Security Disability. You kind of wonder why he was playing the lottery, if he doesn't have much money. But that's okay. He won $2 million. The scary part is he will tell you that he only got $800,000 of the money because of taxes. But then he had the $800,000. But then he calls up the agency that gives him the food stamps and says, I just won the lottery here. Am I still eligible for food stamps? They look up the rules. They think about it, and they go, yeah, you're good with food stamps. You don't have an income. We don't count one-time payments as anything. So this guy is driving around in a white Mercedes convertible. He's living in a $500,000 house, brand new. He's drinking a better style of liquor, I think, I'm imagining. And he still gets his food stamps every week on the government payroll. Leroy Fick. It's an unintended consequence. And it's easy to see these flaws after the fact, and it is very, very hard to design legislation that will not be scammed by all kinds of people. And the babysitter story is really there to say it's not just like the nefarious scammers. It's lots and lots of people will take advantage. I used to run the Division of Unemployment Assistance in Massachusetts, and there were people who would literally claim and qualify for and receive unemployment insurance year after year after year after year after year because they would run small businesses and they would manage their business in such a way that they would lay themselves off for periods of the year to collect unemployment insurance. So people are going to take advantage of the law whenever you're giving away money. So the implementation phase is also one that you can have lots and lots of problems in. What do we got next? this was, again, the survey of senior officials in the bureaucracy, and we asked them how well the federal government designs legislation, and they said that only 16% of them said that the federal government designed policies that can actually be implemented successfully. And this is, I would say, is likening it to house builders saying that only 16% of architects can give you a design that you can actually build. This is a very, very sobering reality, and again, it's coming from senior level people who've been in our federal government for a long time, very respected individuals. So what are some of the barriers to government that make it so hard to get things done? There's a lot of political things that separate the public sector from the private sector. One is that there's no single measure of success. How do you measure the success of a police department or a fire department in a town? How do you measure the success of the Division of Unemployment Assistance? Without the comparison of competition, you have a challenge in there.
Well, apparently a lot of places measure a police department by how many tickets they can have.
So and it's true that actually you get into a challenging circumstance when you do try to measure the performance of a public agency. It's very, very hard to do because there's competing priorities, right? You want to give out tickets to keep the road safe, but you also want to not give out tickets that you shouldn't give out. You want to try to do different things in different places. You want to try to reduce crime in certain communities, but you also don't want to have it become a police state. There's no feedback on performance. Many, many government entities are monopolies, so they don't get the painful feedback of losing business, as it were. If you're the only game in town, you do all right. Managerial uncertainty. It is very, very difficult. If you go into the public sector as a manager, one of the things you live with is that you are in that role only until the next election. And because when the governor moves on, there's a very, very good chance that your job will go with it if you're in the management layer. And so that goes to the next point, which is the time horizon in government is very, very short. If you're elected governor of a state and there's something you can do that will have impact 10, 15, 20 years down the line, how much effort are you going to put into doing that? Because you're not going to get any credit for that. So if there's short-term pain for long-term gain, very hard for politicians to take that exchange. And then the last one is this concept of political economy and the notion of the phenomenon of concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. That's a fancy term. Have you guys heard that one before? I hope you have. And I'm going to give you one example of it because it's so painful. In 2002, the Farm Bill was reauthorized, the Farm Bill, and for the first time in our nation's history, and I know you're going to be very excited about this, for the first time in our nation's history, garbanzo beans were included in those lists of crops that received federal price supports. Garbanzo beans. Now, we had made it as a nation. I mean, we had been scraping by for the first 220 years or so without garbanzo beans being protected as a crop. And now that we have price supports, we're going to lessen our dangerous foreign dependence on garbanzo beans. How did this law come into being? It came in because of the idea of concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. The garbanzo bean subsidies cost maybe $50 million a year. That's the size of the program. Which, that comes to like 20 cents a person in the United States or something like that. You're probably not going to write your congressman complaining about garbanzo. You may not have even been aware that garbanzo beans received a subsidy in 2002 for the first time, right? Did you know that? You probably hadn't been following it in the press. But you know who was following it? Is the National Dried Pea and Lentil Association of Moscow, Idaho, who in the late 90s had hired a K Street lobbyist to lobby the Farm Committee, the Agricultural Committee in Congress, to get this law passed. Why did they do that? Because the benefits to them is concentrated. There's only a handful of garbanzo bean growers in the world that are splitting up that $50 million pot. There's 300 million Americans that are paying the costs. So the benefits are concentrated and the costs are diffuse. And what that means for a sense of political economy is that the congressman who's sitting on the Ag Committee gets donations, they get support, and they get kudos from the concentrated people who receive the benefit. And the people who are harmed to the degree of 20 cents a year, you guys never know about it. You never care, and you don't pay attention. So the concentrated benefits and diffuse cost phenomenon works over and over and over again to the detriment of good government and good governance. All right. So what we have led to since 1969 is really today we have a government in crisis. Most government organizations are not built for the current circumstances that we are in today. And I've been talking and being somewhat critical of government for a while, but I really want to pause and think about how it is that we ought to think and talk about government, because I want to talk for a minute about the importance of government. Good government is critical to our peace, prosperity, and economic well-being. Our human happiness really is so dependent on a sense of government that is just and not corrupt. And when you look at places that have bad government, whether it's North Korea or Cuba, the human misery that results from bad government is devastating. So we need to be, I don't want to overstate it, but almost reverent of good government and the benefits that we as a society have because we've inherited good government through the years, right down from the American Revolution through today. There are many important tasks that government has to do: national defense, administration of civil and criminal justice. I also want to think when we talk about government to remember that there are some corrupt public officials, there are some lazy bureaucrats, there are some people at the General Services Administration who probably made some bad choices with respect to a party in Las Vegas. But in general, it's not that the problems today are not the consequence or the result of bad people. They are the results of bad systems. And we need to rethink the systems of government. And we need to also think about not just what government ought to do, but how government actually operates. And I would argue that we need to take the study of public administration more seriously than we do. We tend to talk about policy a lot. We really need to think about how government does and doesn't function effectively. So that's our road to the journey to success. And the biggest challenge that is facing us today and that is facing the folks in this room are some of these scary numbers that I have on the board. Our national debt is $15.7 trillion. Everybody in the room is $50,000 in debt. The federal government spends $1.56 for every dollar it brings in revenue. And by the year 2030, all federal revenues will go to 4 programs: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. Interest on the debt is scheduled to just spike like a hockey stick in the next 20 to 30 years, and it is truly, truly scary. This is just those numbers again. You can see that the net interest is the red line on the right, and in the next 50 years it just spikes up like crazy. That's what happens when you spend more than you bring in every single year. Barbara Tuchman is a historian, and she wrote about a history book called The March of Folly that looked at government institutions that had not just made mistakes, but that had acted with folly. And she defined folly in 3 ways. She said that the poor policies had to occur over a number of years. They had to be executed by different people. So it couldn't be just like Castro in Cuba is not an example of folly. It's an example of one individual ruining a nation for 50 years. So it has to happen over years. It has to be not just one leader. And there has to be warning voices talking about the folly of the course of action that's underway while it's happening. She cites the example of the Vietnam War in America as a piece of folly, and the actions of the British Empire in losing the American colonies between 1760 and 1776 as also another march of folly. And I would put it to you that we are similarly in a state of a march of folly when it comes to our debt and deficit, that we are not addressing this problem. There is a way we can do it. There is an idea. There's a road to fiscal sanity. We need to accept the idea that unsustainable really is unsustainable. The chart I just showed with expenses and interest going crazy, we can never get there. We will become Greece before we get there. In terms of design, there are big changes that we have to make in what we expect government to do and how it operates. There's a huge challenge in making this a political reality. Both sides in Washington are really gridlocked on this issue. There have been commissions and committees, and nothing so far has come up with anything that comes close to a bipartisan approach to this. Implementation is going to be a challenge. We've tried a lot of rules to make ourselves follow things. They haven't been followed. And the result is that we either change the way we've been operating, or our future is very, very grim. We're going to become Greece or California. And I asked the question, I ended up with the question sort of, what does America need today? And I would argue that what we need is an entire reboot of how we think about government. And I love this slide because we know that the interior designer who laid out these cushions is not a technical person, right? And how do we know that? Yeah, Control, Alt, Delete. Okay, thank you very much. I come from Massachusetts, and this is one of my favorite statues. This is the statue of, actually, you guys tell me, what's this a statue of in Massachusetts? Who is it? No, it's not Paul Revere. Close, though, really close. This is who Paul Revere was riding around talking to. This is what we call the Minutemen, the farmers. You see, one of the reasons I love this statue is he's got his hand on a plow. That's a plow. This is just a regular guy who is, he's at the North Bridge in Concord, Massachusetts, which is where the shot heard around the world was fired, the first battle of Lexington and Concord between the American colonists and the British. And he's a person who is sort of, his primary occupation is a farmer. He's taking care of his family. He's taking care of his day-to-day life. And yet when the call comes from Paul Revere that there's danger, he gets out and he grabs his gun and he goes out and he makes change happen. And because of what he did and what a lot of people have done in the past 225 years in this country, we benefit from this because we, in a democracy, do not need to get our guns to make change. We can make change by being politically aware, by being politically active, by holding our politicians to a higher standard in terms of the government that they deliver to us. And you, as the generation that's coming up to inherit the next layer of government, I think it's so important that you see this not as a sort of a symbol of violence, but of taking part, active part and participation in your political life. Because our nation is in need of serious rethinking and improvement in terms of how we are governing ourselves. The course we're on, I think President Obama has said it well. He says the challenge is not, or the problem is not that the problems we face are so big, it's that our politics and our response to them is so small and inadequate to the challenges we're facing today. So ultimately, government can do great things, but it doesn't have to. And I would argue that if you get involved and have the courage to try to participate in the promise of American government and American democracy, we can go to a place where we can achieve great success, like putting a man on the moon. Thank you very, very much. I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Now, Dale, was this the English-speaking audience, or did we have a different... was I supposed to be in? No, we got questions. We have to have questions. Somebody's got to have a question. I know you started like 8 a.m. this morning.
You mentioned that you're from Massachusetts, as I am, and that you had had significant experience in administration in Massachusetts,
Yep.
in the administration of Governor Mitt Romney.
Yep.
And I think perhaps the audience might like to hear if you have any particular lessons that you learned from that experience, or humorous episodes, or whatever that would give us some insight into what government was like as you worked in it in Massachusetts.
Thank you. One thing I saw was that it was, I think it was healthy at the time that there was a Republican governor because the legislature is very heavily Democratic, and I think there's something, whenever one party has a monopoly, I think that's a real problem. Another thing I saw was that a lot of times I did see people who worked in government who were hardworking, cared about what they were doing in the bureaucracy or whatever, and I think that it was helpful for me to see that the frustrating results that I sometimes see in government generally aren't the result of the actual workers who are trying to do a good job for the most part every day. And I did see also, too, a political class that I think was too often, and I don't refer to the governor in this regard, but too often interested in providing favors and their own political benefit than in the idea of good governance, and that was discouraging. So that's part of what I saw from the inside. You had a question over here?
I have a pretty general question. As an American civilian, we've been seeing all these problems, and I know that we're probably more aware than the general public that, yeah, this is impending upon us and we might become Greece. But short of a revolution, what can we do? Like, does calling our congressman actually do anything? Like, is there anything that we can do to start the change, to get this rolling?
You know, I absolutely believe that one of the things that's happening out there is that the civil or civic discourse in our nation, if you go on the blogs and you read articles, or if you go to the media has become bifurcated into these camps that are very, very partisan, and their primary objective seems to be to point out the moral shortcomings of the folks on the other side. It's a very, people no longer just question each other's policy decisions. If you disagree with me, you're a bad person, and vice versa. And it's really divisive. So I actually do believe that you can influence the world. I wouldn't even go right to your congressman. Write to your local newspaper. Read good books, like If We Can Put a Man on the Moon. Read things that keep you informed in a way that gets you past. I would just stop reading like the newspapers and watching TV news. They're really not helpful. Read some history books and become a more conversant in what's going on around you, and talk with your friends in a respectful way about places where you may differ in areas of government. Because I do think, particularly in young folks on a lot of campuses, there is in some cases, an unthinking allegiance to a particular political viewpoint that appears to be sort of the current thinking. And I think that without it being examined and discussed, it's dangerous. And I absolutely, let me tell you this. You are going to make a difference in the world. You are going to make a difference in the world. It may not be, grand Napoleon difference, but you make a difference every day based on what you do, the choices you make, the way you conduct yourselves, what you say, how you treat your family, your friends, and your neighbors. And I think that if you choose to make a positive difference with respect to the direction our government is heading in, it will make a difference. I totally believe that.
John? Oh.
Yeah.
I'll be right there. John, do you remember when Al Gore was in charge of reinventing government?
Yes.
And can you comment on that? Was that successful? Does it seem as though that initiative has just been forgotten?
Yeah.
And is it best forgotten? What?
I would give folks in this room won't even have heard of it, but Al Gore once went on David Letterman, and he wore goggles, and he smashed an ashtray. And the reason he did this was because the government was buying ashtrays, and part of the requirement was that an ashtray that was smashed with a hammer would break into no more than 80 pieces. And he wanted to reinvent the federal government, have less bureaucracy, less rules, and try to become more efficient. There were parts of the reinventing government movement and the ideas behind using competitive contracting instead of government monopolies, examining what you were doing to try to become more efficient, that I think both made a difference and were somewhat successful. And I actually, regret that public administration sort of isn't even viewed. It's not even taken seriously anymore. There's a culture within government increasingly of that, almost a despair within the public sector workforce, in the management class, around what can be done, and almost like a cynical, it doesn't matter what we do, which is very, very dangerous. So I think that there was a sentiment of reinventing government that I think was admirable. There was also a component of it that was a little bit of PR and a little bit of government can be as efficient as any business, and we can be really entrepreneurial and go outside the bounds of things that I don't necessarily agree with. But I think that the book Reinventing Government had a lot of good ideas in it. Some stuff I disagreed with around the idea of what government should take on. Because I think some of what this tells you is that one of the biggest decisions you can make is to be skeptical when you ask government to take on too much or things that are outside of its realm, which I don't think Reinventing Government thought about as much as it probably should have. But to the extent that it actually, serious grown-ups were thinking about how to make government work better, I think it was great. We had a question over here.
These past 3 days, we've kind of heard about how our government sucks and how we're on like a path for destruction.
Okay, you already heard that, I guess. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could briefly comment on like good things our government are doing right now, and if you were in charge, what would be your first line of action?
If I were king of the forest, I don't know. Yeah, the challenging thing is that there's a lot of, I think, good things that it's funny, I'm a member of town meeting in my local town. And when you see town meeting up close, which is a New England tradition, it's like there's like 300 neighbors go and we meet in this big auditorium and we vote on like whether we should allow liquor sold in the town or not. It's really weird. Like democracy really works great there, and there's a lot of good things that happen. I think that government, we take for granted the fact that most of our police forces throughout the country most of the time are not corrupt, that there's a general sense in the administration of justice in our country that there's a rule of law that matters and that judges' views are respected and laws are executed. So there's a lot that really, when you step back and look globally, that we as a nation still do really, really right. I think we do a lot right when it comes to allowing the market to work and allow people the freedom to set their own prices, make their own decisions, start companies and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of good thing that still happens in this country through forbearance by government into interfering with the market. There's more market interference now than there was in the past, which I find somewhat regrettable in some areas. I think we've done a good job on pollution. We stopped acid rain in the late 80s in a way that didn't overly impact the economy. So there's some stuff that's going well, but truth be told, if you look at the whole picture, there's particularly with the economic trajectory, the inexorable mathematical trajectory, that it's very, very challenging to be overly optimistic about what's happening in the big picture in government right now, because that debt picture is going to be a burden that is going to be harder and harder. By the year 2020, the Congressional Budget Office, which is not some right-wing wacko group, it's the Congressional Budget Office, is predicting that interest on the debt will be about what we spend on national defense. That's not a healthy place for a country to be. And so, there is, I wouldn't say, government stinks or whatever. I don't think that that's an attitude or a thought we want to have. I think we want to be sitting here going, we have some very, very serious problems. Government can be much better than it is, and we need to start working on making it better, or we will get worse. And as I said, good government is such a blessing, and it's such a, so important to human happiness and human freedom.
Speaking of the fiscal, well, I don't know if it's a crisis yet, but the impending fiscal crisis, what do you think about the bipartisan debt commission that was set up? And it seems like it wasn't the first. Why is that a way to approach it, to overcome political inertia?
It's really hard. I think that until, the debt commission was an attempt to say we're really going to get together and do this, and it didn't get enough votes to get recommended. It had a majority of the commission, but not the supermajority that it needed to get voted up by or down by Congress. You have to keep trying. You have to go back. I don't know whether it's a debt commission or a blue ribbon commission or just some group of senators or someone who says, we are collectively, right now, the other party just blames the other party for whatever goes wrong. The reason both parties blame the other side for the failure of the debt commission. Both sides blame the other for the breakdown of the debt talks last time there was a debt ceiling fight. And there are now automatic cuts that are looming that everybody knows we have to do something other than those automatic cuts that we agreed to. I don't know what the answer is. That's the biggest challenge I think facing the road forward, is the willingness of the political leadership to take ownership jointly of the necessary pain in the short term that's necessary to get this situation under control. Because what will happen is, you can keep voting to have your cake and eat it too for only so long, and then it stops. And when it stops hard, and then you get pain on a magnitude way, way greater than if you take positive steps now. But I don't know what the right answer is, but you got to keep going at it. So I hope I didn't overly discourage you tonight, because I'm ultimately very optimistic about the fact that our nation has so much energy, so much history behind it, and examples from our past of what we can do when we try to solve problems. Yes?
Let's say that our country is still going to go on the path that it currently is going at.
Okay.
What do you expect to happen to the 310 million Americans that we have now? Do you expect it to drop because simply people are scared to live here due to the debt or the taxes or whatever it may be?
I don't know where they're going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, Europe is facing this problem in, Greece, Spain, Italy are sort of leaders in that regard of of hitting the fiscal wall, but it becomes challenging. And I do think that, you know, the economic, I think that, you know, you've heard a lot about the benefits of trade and the fact that, you know, there's a lot of positives with the economic rise of China in some respects, and also trying to get them to be a more free and open and democratic system of government. But I mean, there's just some concerns that if we, as a beacon of freedom, become weaker, that's what I really get concerned about, is the rise somewhere of some more malevolent, you know, global force. Because, you know, like I said, I'm still optimistic about our country. I don't think it's going to, you know, become like an economic basket case overnight or anything. But, you know, I do think in the longer term, our nation made a huge positive contribution to global happiness in the 20th century, with what we did in World War II, and through free trade and setting up democracies in Japan, and being a great global citizen, and showing also too what trade can do, what freedom can do. And I just wonder if we'll be able to serve that role in the coming decades as things go on. That would be my concern. All right, Dale, these guys want to go. I can tell, I can feel it. But I want to say thank you very, very much for your kind attention this evening. Thank you.